Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about a little bit of a complex subject, and that has to do with how people impose morality as a group. So, there's two ways to approach this. One is through culture, and the other is through governance policy. Now, these are very different approaches, and historically in the West, particularly in America, we have operated on something called liberalism, which we need to define. The colloquial use of it today is not a very accurate definition of the term. And so, how I would define liberalism is the separation of powers in governance and the expression of negative rights through governance. Um, this idea began with the signing of the Magna Carta. So a king in England voluntarily subdued himself to a degree and separated powers into a court. So when we think about like a king and he has his royal court and the lords are in there and they're all fancy and running around doing things, this represents power that the king himself could no longer have in some degrees that he would delegate to the court. And so it was no longer a king having absolute authority. On top of that, some rights were established given to, I guess you could call them the peasants, saying that there are certain things that the king could not do that would be a violation. And either the courts or the religious institution would verify that the king is not violating anyone's rights. So that was the first step in creating liberalism. Then came along some authors like John Locke and some others, and they started coining the term liberalism. And this set of governance is the idea that negative rights, which are things you already have that the government cannot take away or the authority structure cannot take away. An example would be something like free speech. You already have the ability to speak by establishing it as a right. It's saying that the government cannot prevent you from speaking. So in America, when we adopted this concept of liberalism, we separated the powers into the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And then we established a number of negative rights like free speech, the right to assemble, the right to own a gun. All of these things are things that you would do on your own that no one is giving to you. And the establishment of the right is the acknowledgement from the government that ability you already possess cannot be taken away from you. So in order to have such a type of governance, everyone involved in the origination of it was aware that you need to have a culture to go with it. So, what that means is in the government, you do not impose morality. Instead, you impose morality through a culture. In America, that was a Christian culture. So, when people say America was built on Christian values, that is not true in the government, but it is true in the culture. And so, this expression of freedom was to say that something may be viewed as immoral by the population. That does not mean it will be made illegal. And so, to prevent people from taking immoral actions that are not illegal, social consequences would be experienced. So, if you live in a community and you participate in that community, let's say you do something that was maybe considered a vice, well, if you do it a little bit, you kind of get away with it. But if you take it too excessively, you'll start to get shunned by the rest of the community. This worked quite well, but over time, especially in the modern age, what wound up happening is I guess you could call them authoritarian ideas. Sometimes we express it as communism. A concept came in to invert this system. So what's happening today with, say, the Democrat Party or the left-leaning culture? Sometimes we call it woke. What their attempt to do is to destigmatize any constraints that exist culturally. So um, it's to say that as a society, we cannot impose or should not impose any restriction at all. So let's take something that was previously considered a vice, um, say gambling, which would be legal, that you could not shame someone for gambling. A lot of this has to do with sexual identity, you know, things that we would have previously constrained through culture are now saying you cannot impose yourself upon someone else in society in any way. Now, they still want, the people who believe this ideology still want to impose their morality on the group. So now the goal is to impose that morality legislatively. So essentially, the American system has been completely flipped on its head. This is important because people have pointed out the similarities between woke and religion, and that woke kind of seems to be a religion. When you understand that it's about morality, then that makes much more sense. So the government says in the United States that you cannot establish an official religion through the state. But it doesn't say that you can't impose morality, which was really the original intent of saying that you cannot impose a religion. So, in this way, there's, say, an absolute push for equality and equity and, correcting historical wrongs and things like this. These are all statements of morality. So, if you recognize that it is serving the same function as a religion, then you can recognize that's how the end around came to not violate the Constitution, but to still impose a one-sided definition of morality through the government. So you'll see this in like the school system. So you can't have prayer, you can't say reference biblical verses or anything that would be construed as religion, i.e., morality. But you can do it if it's not labeled as a religion, but is still an imposition of morality. So I think this is something that the political right could really improve upon recognizing in what belongs in culture and what belongs in governance, and that the right's opposition has completely inverted this strategy, which is in complete violation of the American spirit or Americanism, what the country was founded on, and why it came to be the way that it is. And so, better defining these terms and recognize what is happening around you would be really helpful. Right now, we're in the middle of something called the culture war. And the issue there is that the political right has really lost sight of focusing on what governance changes need to be made. So we're having this battle of morality in the conversation, and what's lost in that is any sort of right wing expression of legislative action, of writing governance policy. And so just becoming aware of the reality of what's happening will really help, I think, both sides understand where the conversation is at the moment, and how people can move forward with this information. So, thank you very much. Have a good day.